So, let me repeat the statement. Partnership is strongest when the country demonstrates that it can help itself. Partnership is strongest when the country demonstrates that it can spend the resources it gets or use the resources donated wisely, strategically, with careful thought, not wantonly, wastefully, and mindlessly. And so I believe our management of everything that was donated to the country establishes that Jamaica is a good, strong, and faithful partner in which overseas entities, our diaspora, can partner with and contribute. So we didn't spend donated funds on things that will disappear or melt away. We've spent the resources on things that are tangible, that if another hurricane were to come, we can resist it, stand up to it, and recover from it. That is what a strong partner looks like. We can account for what we have received. I have addressed that issue on Labor Day. So, Jamaica must never adopt the view that our survival depends on waiting for rescue. We must plan, prepare, organize, respond, and recover as an independent country while using partnerships to strengthen national action. One area in which we're going to have to adopt very quickly is in immediate airlift for communities that were marooned or cut off in the immediate hours following the hurricane. That was a real challenge in getting to those communities that were cut off, including search and rescue. So the government will be making some announcements in a few days from now about further investments into the logistics, transport, and operational capabilities of the JDF. I see the CDS there smiling, but it is absolutely important for our response capabilities. And I see Minister Mackenzie saying that there is also a request from the fire brigade for more equipment. Well, we'll put all of it in the mix. To improve how external support is received, the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister and the United Nations Resident Coordinator will co-chair the International Disaster Committee. So the first lesson from Melissa is that leadership must be visible, coordinated, and disciplined. In an emergency, leadership means every part of the system knows its role, acts within its authority, shares information, escalates problems quickly, and does not wait to be chased. Meaning leadership takes initiative. Leadership has agency. They are responsible. Citizens and partners must never feel the absence of leadership. So it's one thing to have people come to help us, and then they are turning around. Who do I partner with to get the help out to the community? And we have seen a few instances of that. Bear in mind, there are some partners who come and don't even bother to ask, who am I partnering with? They are out in the field. But largely, there has to be a mechanism predetermined in place, so when people come to partner, it is a simple plug and play. But that means our leadership must be present. We must be there to meet them at our ports when they come to assist. ODPEM, by law, must be a national bastion of leadership in crisis. Steps have already been taken to strengthen ODPEM, including its organizational review, new hires, upgraded posts, staff welfare measures, and planned training. But ODPEM must now become Jamaica's national resilience organization, able to help the country anticipate, withstand, respond to, recover from, and adapt to major shocks without collapsing essential services, public confidence, economic activity, or the machinery of government. Early after Hurricane Beryl, we recognized that there were some deficiencies in ODPEM. ODPEM is an absolutely important institution, but for many years, not having been tested, it has become inward-looking and essentially existing for existing sake. And the organization needs real intervention. The challenge is, of course, that you have to drive the car while fixing the engine. So it has to be done with great care and thought, both for the welfare and respect of the workers who are there and for the mission that the organization was set up to achieve. And that is the struggle of ODPEM, and indeed generally of many organizations. Sometimes we lose sight of what the mission is as we are trying to resolve the internal issues within the organization. But ODPEM cannot be that organization where the internal issues are viewed as more important than the mission. In effect, ODPEM is an essential service. It is not described as such in law. I know there were discussions to categorize it as such, but it is something Minister and the acting head of ODPEM that we will have to discuss because we need to remission ODPEM. So the second lesson is that logistics is central. Melissa showed that national disaster response in large part is a logistics operation. Receiving, storing, securing, transporting, distributing, verifying, and reporting. That understanding informed the decision after Melissa to reassign ODPEM to OPM and also to assign the Ministry of Defense to OPM as well. Yes, there is a Ministry of Defense. Because ODPEM is a curious kind of organization in the sense that it's really planning, strategy, coordination, but the effect of logistics, meaning who is actually going to lift the bag of rice, put it on the truck, drive it down to the warehouse, store it in the warehouse, break it into smaller bags, and distribute it. ODPEM will oversee all of that and plan it, but it is the JDF that actually does it, along with volunteers. So you can see that there is a very close symbiotic relationship between ODPEM and the JDF. So we brought them under the same umbrella to have that coordination more seamlessly effected. And I believe it is working, and it has worked, taking us through the difficult first few weeks of the relief, particularly in the relief element of our response. This understanding informed the decision that after Melissa, as I've said, to reassign the Ministry of Defense and ODPEM to the Office of Prime Minister, creating a clearer center of coordination for emergency logistics and reducing fragmentation in relief movement. ODPEM remains the central agency for disaster preparedness and emergency management, but it must be better integrated with the JDF's logistics, command, discipline, mobility, engineering, communication, and reach. The third lesson is that information is a life-saving asset. Information is an asset. If we do not know where people are, where roads are blocked, where communities are cut off, where supplies are located, where shelters are operating, and where electricity and water are down, the state is partially blind. Melissa exposed gaps in the national operating picture. Some communities, which are informal, scattered, poorly mapped, or not fully captured in our database, those communities were not served or got service later on in the response. That cannot continue. Jamaica cannot continue as an informal society. Informality hampers recovery. It hampers relief. It hampers reconstruction. This mentality that you can go and build anywhere, live anywhere, and somehow the state must know that you are there, when you don't want the state to know that you are there. Then you say, you didn't come to me. Well, we didn't know you were there because it's not documented. And the informality is not just in our choice of how we choose to live and the spatial awareness of the country. It is also in how, as citizens, we choose to be documented. In the initial stages of the relief effort, no one could really say to us that we should ask for ID to give out care packages. But some people were thinking it. And I wouldn't be surprised if some report comes out that we gave out care packages and we didn't ask for ID. Look out for it. In the same way as other emergency things had to be given out, and at the time, you couldn't ask for identification. But if we were not a society that viewed unique identity as a trespass on privacy, then it would be much easier for us to conduct relief and humanitarian efforts. And that is the reality. The challenge we face is that every grant that we're going to give, the persons getting the grant have to be registered. But they have to be registered at each instance. So we registered, you think about it. You had to go through a registration process in COVID to get the grant. Then you had to go through a registration process in Beryl. And you had to go through a registration process in Melissa. If there were just one unique registration number with your registration ID linked into a national database, there would be no need for this very laborious process where errors are made, duplications happen, slows down the process. I just thought that this was a good opportunity to explain to the public why national identification is important. One massive headache to identify the people who should get the grant, then to get them to the stores to get the goods. And then, if it isn't done right, you get some report saying that you didn't dot this I and cross this T. Which you ought to get, because the objective is to get the thing to perfection. But bear in mind, the cultural issues that we have in our society. In other words, we are the ones standing in our way of efficiency. If we were, accepted that NIDS was important and we did it 5 years ago and we implemented it, today we wouldn't be talking about the next hurricane season coming and the Minister of Labour and Social Security having to think about how am I going to do another assessment to reassess the same people, to ask them to go and register again, God forbid if anything were to happen. Just saying. So The fourth lesson is that recovery begins during response. Preparedness, response, relief, recovery, and reconstruction are different phases, but they are part of one continuum. Decisions made in the first hours affects the first week. Decisions made in the first week affects the first year. And decisions made in reconstruction affects the next generation. If we build roads without drainage, if we rebuild the roads that were destroyed without drainage, we are effectively rebuilding risks. If we replace roofs without stronger standards, we are inviting repeated loss. If we restore communities in the same high-risk place, then we are not building resilience, we are just inviting another disaster. That is why the government will advance a resilience impact assessment framework for major policies, programs, infrastructure investments, and strategic projects. Significant public investment must be assessed not only by cost, procurement readiness, or economic return, but also by their contribution to disaster and climate resilience. Continuity of essential services, protection of vulnerable populations, national security, environmental sustainability, community adaptive capacity, and long-term financial risk reduction. Resilience must become a pre-disaster governance standard. And we have been doing that. We have been building resilience into everything that we do. And one area in which we have done it well is actually in public financing. Jamaica has one of the most resilient public financing architecture. Now, the fifth lesson is that government institutions must be resilient before disaster strikes. So we cannot expect a police station, hospital, municipal office, or fire station to serve the public during a disaster if it has no backup power, no continuity of business plan, no tested communications or alternate sites. And we saw this. Parish council buildings collapsing, fire stations flooded. Can you imagine? Police stations. By the way, the police infrastructure stood up, I think, the best out of all except for the JDF, but generally, they stood up fairly well and was able to be the main point of service delivery in the difficult eras. That was especially the case in St. Elizabeth, where the Black River Police Station was flooded, but continued. The policemen there continued to operate and offer service. So, this is a good point to address this issue of how we use the resources that were donated. So we got some generators in the initial wave of international donations. And there are those who were thinking that we should just take the generators and give them away. Just give them to anyone, or anyone, or a friend who come to say, hey, I don't have any power at my house, you give me. Because, there's this notion that just give the generators, just give it to the poor people, man. This notion that you are helping the poor by, just spending resources without thought. Jamaica has suffered from that mentality for so long, and that is one of the reasons why we remain poor. We cannot allow people with that thinking to lead our country. What did we do with the generators? We gave them to the police stations, to the JDF, to the fire brigade, to the parish councils, so that those entities can have the resilience. When I toured the country in the immediate days after the hurricane, the only place that would have electricity would be the police station that either had a solar system on its roof or had a generator. And everybody was coming there to, as I said, beg a charge. That's the reality. So if we're talking about truly helping the poor, you do that by building resilience into the entities that are going to respond to the disasters that they have. And that's what we did. That's what we did. And that's why our partners understand that we are good partners. And giving resources to Jamaica, those resources will be multiplied in the effect that it will have on the population as a whole. There is no question about anything gone off into people's private properties or for their private use. We maximize the resources that we have for the public good. So cabinet decision making, public finance, national security coordination, emergency communication, public health, social protection, utilities coordination, and essential records must be sustained during a disaster. There cannot be any break. And we are going to use the resources to ensure that there is continuity of government, continuity of business, continuity of society, even after a major catastrophic event. And the only way you can do that is to use the resources donated and the resources you are spending to build resilience. Resilience guarantees continuity. And that's why Jamaica was basically up and running, essentially, a few weeks after the hurricane, because we invested in resilience. And I want to spend a little time on the sixth lesson, which is fiscal resilience matters. By the way, when I use the term fiscal, I know there are a lot of people may not understand what is it that I'm talking about when I say fiscal. Not physical, but fiscal resilience. Fiscal refers to money, public financing, public accounts, how they are used. So, how the government structures its budget and its spending is important for a disaster response. And to put it simply, if you have no money, you can't respond. If you have no money, you cannot respond. In fact, if you have no money, you have to wait on others to come to respond. This government was able to respond immediately because for the first time in a long time, this government was able to save for a disaster. We were able to save and we were able to insure. So it's savings, insurance, and then we were able to pre-position funds that we could get easy access to through borrowing. So we had a layered strategy of being able to fund the relief, restoration, and recovery. To put it to you in a simple way, if the government wasn't able to bring the funding for JPS to bring in the crews to restore the electricity, today we would be saying we don't have any electricity in some of the parishes. That is fiscal resilience. Government planned, put in place a catastrophe bond, which yielded a payment, and then we used the funds strategically for the recovery of critical public services. Fiscal resilience. So preparedness is not only shelters, relief supplies, and emergency services. A country must also have financial readiness. Jamaica's ability to respond to shocks has improved because of fiscal discipline, buffers, insurance arrangements, and disaster risk financing instruments. And I'm pleased to say that we floated our our third catastrophe bond, I believe, successfully, which showed from the international community that there is, an appetite for Jamaica. And it was a great success that we were able to do that. And the Minister of Finance, as we speak, she is overseas, and she sent me a little note to say that in terms of the CRIF, which is the Regional Disaster Insurance Fund, that she has started a new round of negotiations with them to expand the program to include a coastal program for our officials so that they will have some coverage and protection. So we are broadening the umbrella. Of protection through fiscal resilience. So the seventh lesson is that community resilience is the foundation of national resilience. Strong agencies matter, but if households are not prepared, shelters are not known, vulnerable persons are not accounted for, and evacuation plans are not tested, national readiness is incomplete. The Ministry of Local Government, municipal corporations, and parish disaster committees must organize, document, test, and share local knowledge before an event. A list in someone's head is not a disaster plan. Let me repeat. A list in someone's head is not a disaster plan. I'm sure there are many well-laid plans, but nobody knows about it. A plan that has not been exercised is only a document. And that is something, Minister, that I need to see happen. Drills. I don't see a lot of drills happening. So, Minister, I'm hopeful that during this season of preparedness that you will do some drills. Simple things, like, one person may have the information written in a particular way and the other person has the information in another way. The two pieces of information cannot sync. So one document may have the person's home number, for example, that they need to call in the event of an emergency. And another document may have the person's work number. And you're trying to get the person, and you can't get the person because you're calling the wrong number. But in a drill, you would pick these things up. So, Minister, I'm looking forward to hearing of some drills that myself and the leader of the opposition will participate in. All right? So, there's nothing wrong with it being a PR exercise, Mark. I mean, the country will hear and see it, and, Yeah. So, we must strengthen parish and community systems so they can sustain themselves for the first 72 to 96 hours after impact, with equipment, training, stronger community emergency response teams, and full participation by parish disaster committee members, including members of parliament and councillors. What was clear to me in the first 3 days after the disaster was the absence of organized local community effort and resource. It stuck in my mind wading through the water in Black River, and a lady walked up to me. She was quite distressed, and she said she walked for 20 miles trying to get to the police station because a wall fell on her neighbor. And she wasn't able to do anything. Obviously, she couldn't move. And so she left coming for help. She didn't know if he was dead or alive. But it struck me at that time that there might be many stories like that where successful community effort would have intervened. But if it were a policy that within the communities you have local, well-organized emergency, environmental youth groups, for example, who could take on this role to assist, you could save many, many more lives. There are many stories of persons who fell ill during the hurricane because they didn't have their medicine. old persons elderly persons who didn't have their medicine or couldn't administer their medicine because their roof was blown off and their medicine got lost somewhere. We need to be thinking more along this line, Minister, where we have in the community a level of first response, that we train some of our youngsters to be able to function in this way. So, as the 2026 hurricane season approaches, every entity represented here must leave with action points. ODPE must become stronger, more technical, more operational, and more data-driven. The security forces and emergency services must institutionalize collaboration. The Ministry of Labour and Social Security must deepen vulnerability mapping while protecting personal information. Health facilities need continuity plans, backup power, water storage, medication protocols, and disease surveillance systems. The education system must plan for continuity of learning and the safe return of children to school. Water, electricity, and telecommunications are core resilience systems. Backup power at critical plumbing stations, emergency crews, fuel arrangements, priority restorations, protocol, and clear public communication must be strengthened. Public communications must fight misinformation. So it's not just PR, and use every channel, including offline systems, to reach communities when power and connectivity fail. Scientific agencies must continue to modernize forecasts, monitoring, and GIS-enabled early warning systems. The private sector also has a central role. Businesses must have continuity plans and be integrated into the national system. We need pre-arranged partnerships, not ad hoc arrangements, with clarity on supplies, storage, movement, and prices. Colleagues, disaster preparedness is not an annual event. It is a perpetual state of national responsibility. Hurricane Melissa reminded us that resilience is built long before the storm arrives in our policies, investments, institutions, and communities. Let us leave this meeting with urgency and clarity. The time for review is ending. The time for execution is now. We must build a Jamaica where infrastructure can withstand hazards, communities can sustain themselves during disruption, information flows quickly, relief reaches those most in need fairly, reconstruction reduces vulnerability rather than recreates it, and resilience becomes part of how we govern. Let us move forward with seriousness, with unity of purpose and confidence in our ability to build a more resilient Jamaica. I thank you.
Members of Council, I believe that the presentation from the Most Honourable Prime Minister and Chairman speaks to the heart of our responsibility going into the new hurricane season. We take note, Prime Minister, of the various comments and suggestions that you have put forward, and giving you the assurance that we will implement as best as possible on those suggestions. Ladies and gentlemen, after the second leg of the meeting will continue, and we will be having some special presentations from entities. I will invite our moderator to come back and to take us through that second segment of the morning's meeting. The Most Honourable Prime Minister will be leaving us now. Can I ask you to stand while the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition leaves? And this is not the end of the meeting, ladies and gentlemen. This is the second half of the meeting to commence. Thank you. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite some of you who are seated a little bit further back, if you could